the honor of having Krista Tukiainen here from Climate Bonds. Krista, welcome.
Thank you.
So one topic that really rubs us the wrong way in industry is the definition of single-use plastics. So if I asked you, in your mind, what would be single-use plastic?
Obvious things that come to mind are things like cutlery, disposable sort of cutlery and straws and things like that.
And I understand why the rules have been written the way they have, because this is exactly what everyone says, right? So I don't think there's anyone out there now in Europe who thinks plastic forks and spoons and plastic straws are a good thing to do. But in some sense of the classification as it stands now, for instance, food and medical packaging, if it's only opened once and then thrown away, is also single-use packaging. And one of the things that we've been saying for a while in food packaging is that it shouldn't be classified as single-use because there are so many steps in the value chain where it protects a high carbon footprint product. So for instance, for a food retailer, a package is being touched by 17 different points in the value chain. 17 different people pick it up. And it needs to provide protection in all of those, yet it is classified in the same way as a straw and comes on the same level of scrutiny. And that quite feels slightly unfair.
And I mean, I agree and I disagree. The one thing that we know that we're going to need safe packaging for medical supplies is the obvious thing, right? That's not going to go anywhere. But also for certain types of food products. And the way that the food distribution and retailing systems and the vast majority of the world are set up at the moment, it's very, very difficult to backtrack that into some sort of, agrarian society where you have you're self-sufficient with your food. That's entirely okay. And there's also quite strong evidence to suggest that actually the life cycle analyses that have been conducted on food that's packaged within plastic is actually better because it prevents the food waste component. But we do also need to think about the end of life options. And this is where, again, I think this classification effort of what is good and what is bad beyond 2050. So beyond just the carbon footprint, what are the practical economic activities and products and services that we need in this world? And how can we make those happen in a way that protects the planet so that it continues to be livable?
We feel at times in packaging that we're in an impossible position. On the one hand, research shows that in the European Union, 81% of consumers place the responsibility for the plastic waste firmly with the manufacturer. That's on one side. On the other side, by nature, legislation isn't the first mover. As the industry, you're trying to make bets on the future. You're trying to sort of foretell, and you make risky and costly bets based on what you think consumer sentiment is, multiplied by the need for educating the consumer and transparency. And then also the assumption of what legislation is going to be. And that, quite frankly, puts us in a sometimes almost impossible position.
I think there is definitely a role for regulation and legislation to push that forward, because we need a sort of massive shift from fossil fuel-based raw materials to bio-based, including various agricultural crops and other types of commodities, as well as forestry-related activities and products. And this is why the kind of developments that are happening in the space that I look at on a day-to-day basis are now so exciting, because what this means in practice is that any company that has exposure to the European Union via its value chain, and any investor that has the same, and therefore by extension companies that want to seek finance within the EU's jurisdiction, will have to comply with this classification system, the taxonomy, which stipulates very clearly what activities and which thresholds within those activities are okay, including the raw material feedstock for bio-based plastics, and what certifications and what kind of disclosure needs to be made available. And ultimately, if things go well, as they're now kind of beginning to shape out, you won't be able to access capital, at least at the same rates as somebody else who is doing the right thing vis-a-vis their sustainability efforts which is quite potentially revolutionary. But this type of development is absolutely what's going to drive it. And we have the EU working together with China, for example, now to harmonize these definitions so that trading and multinational companies who have exposures in both areas can continue to work seamlessly toward a jointly agreed sustainable future, much more granular than just saying we all need to get to net zero by 2050, which we already know. In that piece of law, we would do well to consult with these industries, including yours, to incorporate many more sort of much more detailed sort of specific product qualities and mechanisms and solutions. And one way that we're going to be doing that as Climate Bonds Initiative is looking at not the pure green investments, but transition investments. And that's going to be focusing on sort of heavy industrial sectors to begin with, but then also plastics is definitely high on the list.